All right, good afternoon. I'm Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to try and figure out the future of smarter buildings. Great that you can join us today. Our panel, our profiles are listed on mondaylive.org in case you're wondering who we are. And just an important point here that views expressed here during this call is our personal, not of any company or organization. And do post your questions and comments on the Zoom chat to make this interactive, because it's always better that way. And if you want anything on this deck, it's also available on mondaylive.org. So this being the month of May, we are talking about the next chapter. We spent the last 3 months talking about very sort of interesting things like OT and IoT and AI, and then we want to sort of look forward as to what the next chapter is. So our agenda today is a normal chit chat about what's going on, and then the next chapter, where today we're really going to be focusing on financial drivers and the sort of the financial equation of all the stuff that we're doing. So really looking forward to that. But before that, hand it over to Ken for an update from Automated Buildings.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, we had some fun last week. ControlCon was in Dallas. I believe Mark was down there for that event, and I was there virtually, and Scott Cochran beamed me up, and you can see me in the corner of the picture there. And my message to the theme was the Smart Building Odyssey. Their theme. And sorry.
No, that was Steve. I just muted him.
Can you switch the picture back?
Sorry.
You've got there. We go. Thanks. Because I'm reading from it, so you can't move it. Okay, so the theme was the Smart Building Odyssey. So my quick message to it is, throughout our history, we've been a self-interested clash of clans, creating mixed messages from different universes and maybe even galaxies. Just the general noise of individual voices. And I was promoting that we need to regroup as a unified OT, IoT industry. And I think this is really exciting right now, because this is a space you want to be in, because everything is going to have to go through us, whether it's cloud native or whether it's AI driven. None of those things physically do anything. We are the connection to reality. So that was kind of the sense of the talk. So it was fun. Jim was up. Jim Young from Realcomm was up after me. I was unable to hear. We had some old school communication problems there that they had to actually plug laptops in to make this all work. So I think it looked okay to the audience, but it was a bit bumpy to try and watch it from afar. Anyway, the other thing, we basically wrote this post on last week's Monday Live, and we're investigating using AI to basically summarize YouTubes, and we're excited about this process because none of us have the time to actually sit and pour through these. Once they're done, AI can quickly go through and pull out some of the comments. And once we see some of the comments, we would then go back in, and we might want to search and see what that person actually said. So I'm not saying that AI is doing a good job of quoting people, but it is doing a good job of just bookmarking YouTubes, which has been a frustration for us to try and get this information out to our audience. And it also allows us to go back and reach into some of our AHR YouTubes and redo that. We're just starting on that process. Bear with us. We're reinventing ourselves as we go along, and we're trying to understand better what AI can do for us. But it does appear to have some useful things. Another just a whole other field that's coming up is the the smart grid interactive buildings. And if you don't know Mike Barker, probably put his linked address there. He's a guy out of the UK. He used to be out of South Africa. He's moved up to the UK. In South Africa, their grid is much shakier than ours, and so demand was extremely important for control. So they've been doing some things there. Australia has sort of some of the same problems. So I think it's worthwhile to take a look at what's happening in the world. And I think the thing we need to draw out of that is buildings can offer gigawatts of new peak capacity as batteries. And imagining buildings as batteries, my first imagination was that we would actually take the power from at night when there was extra power on the grid, put it in a battery of some sort, whether that was stored chilled water or whether it was EVs or whatever. But actually, the other thing that unfolds in this article is we have this situation now that we have a tremendous amount of renewables on the grid. And on a sunny, windy day, we can start shutting down carbon plants to do that if we know. And all of a sudden, we can now offer a new rate at midday, which kind of blew my imagination. So anyway, some interesting stuff happening there. Again, we're in absolutely the right place. All of this is going to have to go through operating technology. So I think you want to start identifying yourself as you are a part of the operating technology industry. So there we go. Another post from last year, last year thing, last week, is the IBCon is presenting the C4 SB.
Yeah, I'll talk about that.
You'll talk about that. Good. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, back to you then, Anto.
Thank you, Ken. What's going on as always? There's a conference later on this week in DC. It's a building innovation conference run by the National Institute of Building Sciences, NIBS. And as part of that, there's going to be a BIM storm, which is a BIM kind of activity being organized by Kim Onuma. He's been working on BIM for many years. He used to come to conferences that I used to organize. So there's a section of that on Friday from 12:30 that is being made available for access via Zoom, and there's a registration link that I put on the slide here, and I'll post it in chat as well in a minute. And this should be sort of interesting because we're taking the IBB concept into the BIM world and talking about how we're bringing interoperability into the buildings world through IBB and through the stuff we're talking about. And obviously the important issue here is to bring the BIM model into this world that we're talking about. So this is a conversation that this conference is starting to get into, and Rick is actually going to go to DC. Do you want to speak to what's the importance of this, Rick, a little bit?
Yeah, as we start to go beyond just HVAC and into other systems, the obvious, elephant in the room is BIM. Another one would be GIS, Geospatial Information Systems. But it's always been sort of on our radar of, when will the time be right to be able to do more integrations or connections with building information models, both for the benefit of the building information model and for the benefit of our, optimizing our world. So we're excited to be participating, and we anticipate a couple of new agreements, alliances to come out of this, and stay tuned for more news on those alliances.
Okay. Thank you. So do join us if you can on Friday. We're going to be making a presentation on that. And the next thing is, as Ken was sort of hinting, we're going to Tampa. We've been talking about this, and we've been working with Jim Young and his team about putting together something that represents the sort of the issues that we have been talking about on Monday Live in the coalition. So we're sort of going to frame this as automation is not the same thing as smart. And it's really, the framing of it is really focused on the fact that it's really difficult and expensive today to get the amount of data that's actually necessary for something like AI. Right. So that's kind of the barrier that we are presenting, and we're presenting a sort of a new way of thinking about this, and IBB comes into this, and some of the stuff that we're actually going to be talking about on this call today is going to come into this. So just sort of put this as a placeholder, and we can come back to that. But really looking forward to that. Do you want to add anything to that, Rick? Because you've been involved in this. No.
No, another step in the the direction of trying to bring awareness to the fact that getting data is really important, and it's been a little bit too expensive and too hard up till now. But things are changing, and I think we're part of the why and how things are changing in a positive way.
So look forward to seeing people in Tampa if you are going. The link board as normal. I won't dwell on that. Any other thoughts or news anybody want to bring up before we move on? There are a couple of questions from James Waddell. The first one is about BIM and OmniFormat and Oscar. I don't know the answer to that. I know somebody that does. So if nobody else on the panel knows that, we can get back to you. The IDL is very much, the second question is about IDL, and it's very much part of what we're talking about. We put IDL in the smarter stack in the data layer. It's basically what the IDL is. It's kind of the way we think about it. So it's not just about the data, it's about everything else up and down the stack, of which data is really critical. So that's the answer of that part of it. Okay, so
David Wills, is OmniFormat anything like Uniformat? David, are you paying attention?
oh, he's not here.
Oh, he was. I thought
He was, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. If it comes back, we can get back to that.
We're definitely following Uniformat. Uniformat, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let us move on to the next chapter, and financial drivers for smarter buildings. And so we on Monday Live and Coalition have really been very focused on the operational side of things, right? So we really want to think, we want to have this conversation about the financial side of things, but focusing on the operational side of things. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to bring Kyle on as a panelist as well. So the operations part of the finances is really our focus. Rick's been talking about TCO for quite a while, and I think the reason for that is he used to work for Dell many years ago, and TCO was a really powerful tool to communicate the value of in those days PCs and those kinds of products, right? So we want to do what the mission here is trying to find something similar to that, something that is financial that actually can communicate the value of the stuff that we're doing. And so what we've come up with is a concept that we call TXO, which is somewhat similar to TCO, but it really means the total cost and other things of operations. So it's a holistic thing. It's not just the cost, it's a cost and other things. And so it's really much more of a framework that we're going to be talking about. And it's really a sort of a framework to help CXOs make decisions about their buildings. That's kind of the sort of the headline of it. And really the X stands for whatever you need it to stand for, sort of solve to X. This is kind of a list of some of the things that we foresee could be implemented using this framework. The total cost of operations, obviously the top one, the simplest one to think about. But things like total risk from operations, which starts to get into things like cybersecurity and other things, and total sustainability and total utility costs, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this is just brainstorming, but this gives you the idea of this sort of framework, the TXO framework. And maybe I'm going to ask Rick to sort of chime in to put a little bit more color, and then we can have an open discussion. I can hand it over to Kyle to drive.
Yeah, I'll get to take a break. So yeah, the concept of TCO was really from the IT world when we were positioning local area networks versus mini computers and mainframes, and the power of the Intel chips was surpassing the power and the megaflops per for a mini computer, and the total cost was being ignored. So we created the concept of TCO to bring attention to the fact that these new architectures were much less to support long term or over time. Plus, you had more flexibility, and you had interoperability, and you had freedom from vendor lock-in. There were a whole bunch of things that kind of went into the concept of TCO. Fast forward 30 years, or God knows how many long it's been, and what we're trying to talk about with our industry here is the fact that we're also at an inflection point, as Ken always talks about, maybe the most exciting point in our industry, because of the availability of things like AI, and because of the new communications capability. And so let's bring a focus to what are we trying to accomplish here, and a lot of it is financial, or can be put in that spot of the X. And so that's a little bit of the background. And again, instead of just cost of ownership, we're looking at risk, we're looking at effectiveness, we're looking at competition, we're looking at the benefits, and putting those into calculatable numbers at the end of the day. And then let's see what KPIs can be affected by using technology in a more aggressive way, or using new technologies in an old way. And a lot of this kind of revolves around the IBB conveniently, but not all of it. But given the context of what the problems are, and what the relative context of how big the problems are, is what we're going to venture to try and do here.
Thank you, Rick. So Kyle, for those who weren't here last week, I'm introducing you to Kyle Smith, who's going to help us help moderate this conversation about financial stuff and TXO.
Very good.
All yours, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Can you hear me okay?
All good. All good.
Oh, great. So, in the conversation that we had mid last week after our first Monday Live, when we kind of got together to talk about this side of it, we picked up on what Tracy hit on at the very end of our session last Monday, which was kind of the Moneyball analogy. And for those who are familiar, not familiar, I'll just do a quick recap and see if this leads us to anywhere interesting. Billy Beane, the general manager for the Oakland A's, had to find a way to compete in a way that was decoupled from salary, right? The status quo in baseball, conventional wisdom, was you had to spend in order to win. If you spent X millions of dollars, that was equal to X number of wins. And they just didn't have the budget to compete. So instead, he defined for him TXO, if he was going to say it, if T was wins, right? Total wins, for him was, I'm going to buy home runs and I'm going to buy walks. And that is our guide stone. So when we go in to acquire players, we're taking a math test that we already have the answers for. And how much do they get on base? And how many home runs do they hit? So when we were talking about this from I had not been exposed to the TXO framework. And when Anto or Rick or somebody said, you could use it for risk, total risk of operations. For me, that solidified and kind of crystallized the idea that we've been talking about, that the data we're looking for is not necessarily just in the building automation system. The data that we're looking for comes from capital planning, comes from human resources, comes from every aspect of the building operation that would contribute to your total risk of running that building. So in that one metric, I don't think total risk for operations is a defined term, right? And that's maybe what we have the opportunity to do. Not in the next 45 minutes. I don't want to turn this into a debate on what the equation should look like. But from a business model perspective, total risk of operations, total efficiency of operations, total sustainability of operations are out there to be defined by people who are in this industry, who are subject matter experts to each one of those things. And it seems like the technology exists today to be able to knock down the barriers that have previously existed to access pools of data that will feed into those metrics. So I'm going to start with Jim. Something that you talked about and have a lot of experience with is the difference between modeling all of this out on a spreadsheet and actually going and doing a facility audit, and how that presents challenges, but also opportunities to really define for your customer what the current status of their operations are.
But it's quite challenging to work with customers because everyone, of course, is understaffed and under-resourced in every different way. And when you bring new technology to bear that changes the equation, that brings that extra information, there's often a learning curve at that customer over the course of the first 6 months, first year, in order to get these kinds of technologies adopted. It takes time for people to look at analytics and look at the kinds of technology that it can provide, and then understand the implications to their job, their ecosystem, their relationship between customers and vendors, different departments in the organization. So it's really it's quite a process that everyone needs to work through. And I actually call it change management, if we were to use management jargon. And when we actually deploy enterprise analytics across a site, there's really a change management phase or management consulting that comes with it in order to get the customer the opportunity to actually use the offering.
Sorry, I've got a barking dog on my side, so
All
that
good.
should be fixed in just a minute here. So when you're working with a customer, and I'll open this up to the rest of the group, when you're working with a customer and 20% of their devices are offline, how does that impact the discussions that you're having with them and the kinds of insights that you're able to deliver?
Oftentimes, there are different people in the organization. It's not a surprise to a number of people that there are a lot of devices offline, and other people, usually higher up the chain, are completely taken aback. But what happens is that it's a process, once again, where when we arrive at a site and we start collecting data, we're going to find things that are wrong, and we have to help people through a continuous improvement process fix what's wrong. But typically, so for instance, we were talking about sub-metering last week. We've found historically that sub-meters fail at a rate of about 1% per month at a large site. So, you're looking at 10% of the site basically going offline over the course of the year if you don't have a business process for keeping it going. But I think that that's true about a lot of different sources of data. So if we were looking at different enterprise silos, if we were looking at any of the building automation sectors, maintenance management, there are going to be things that we need to do to true up that data to make the cleanse that data, if you will, to make the information and the analytics applications have value.
Rick, that you led right into my next question, Jim. So for Rick, I know that you have worked with some pretty large clients on, you know, accessing different domains of data, like the capital planning system. So what are the data challenges that we can learn from in the building automation environment that apply to data challenges in those other systems? Is the data from other systems typically cleaner, better, worse than what you're finding in the BMS?
To Jim's point, there's often data missing or that it's garbage in, garbage out. But this is where, by starting to focus on having a scoreboard, you get to point out where the crap is, or the missing data is, or so setting up a framework, kind of like putting a scoreboard in the outfield, and, you know, love that analogy, and of course love Moneyball. But once you put the scoreboard out there, and then you have, oh, look, we don't have any data from the third inning, is that acceptable? You know, it starts to bring attention to what's missing in terms of the equations and calculating the KPIs. So we had great luck with that approach, because we set up what the framework was for these large organizations at the highest levels of executive level visibility. And then we started just pointing out where it was really difficult to get data. And so that part of the scoreboard was empty. And then the executive turns to the staff and says, well, what does it cost to get data from that, for that piece? Because it looks like that decision would help me get more wins, runs, or home runs, or whatever, you know, get the KPI to be better. So that was one of the best learnings, was the reason to set up a framework for evaluation and creating TXO in this case, and using KPIs, was because it allowed us to point out where there should be investment in getting better data. Because if you're swinging in the dark, that's costing you about 30% efficiency. And every executive knows that. So by putting the scoreboard right up front, you get to point out, well, this company doesn't let us use their API. This company uses data format that's not compatible with what we're trying to do. And this company is totally proprietary. And it started to change the behavior of the executive, what the executives would demand.
So I'm gonna poke the bear a little bit here. So would anybody argue with every executive knows that bad data and inefficient operations is costing them 30%? Is that a good measure, or a good rule of thumb?
I would say no. I would argue that when you say manager, are you talking property manager, facility manager, or asset manager from a financial ownership perspective?
Yeah, I tend to go to the highest end, but Rick, what was your intention?
This was at the CEO level. So, because as Kyle's you pointed out, or Jim's pointed out, is that the CEOs know that they've got dysfunctional staff layers. So you have to be able to get the scoreboard to be interesting to the CEO. And they pretty much agree with the fact that chaos theory, if we don't know what's happening, it's probably 30% off of best practice.
David?
So I think from that perspective, I could see how that could be true and that there's bad data. But I also think the CEOs, to make gross generalizations, the CEOs have entrusted their COOs and CFOs to run a lean business. And so they haven't ever made the investment in the buildings and in the building systems to have this level of data. So I think we're probably saying the same thing, Rick. It's not that it's because they've never been able to realize the return on investment from having this data. So they've never made that investment. So we're actually talking about making that investment now and the value of doing
So
think
from a go-to-market perspective, how does that change, in your day-to-day interactions, the median transaction that you're doing in your business? Who is the audience for that? And how are they? Let's just start there because it can be a complex question. Who is the audience that you're typically selling to?
Who's that to?
Anybody?
VP of Facilities, VP Sustainability.
Okay. Is that anybody different than that?
Potentially also risk.
Okay. Not hearing anything differently. VPs, facilities, sustainability, and risk.
I think some of it goes back to something David was saying about the people engaged or who's involved in this, in that you kind of, you can have all the data you need, you can have all the systems you need, but if there's not anybody driving it from a day-to-day basis, we all know that the best buildings that are run are those where they've got someone really active in there who's interested and wants to actually make it work. And a lot of all these things on the screen can actually be achieved, but you still need that, you've got the data, you may even have the tools and the packages, everything going. But unless you've got that one person who's engaged in it, and it's not the CFO or the VP or the CEO, it's someone who's responsible and who wants to make the systems work, not only just for cost, but also I think part of what we've not touched is things like staff retention and all these things, because the building is good. There's a lot of the things that, we don't always touch on, which actually do cost, it does come into the cost of operations, but it needs that. It's not a data scientist as such, but someone who knows what he wants out of it and how to use the systems he's got.
Yeah. So Roger, you're going right where I wanted the conversation to go. And you bring up an interesting point. I've circled that. I've taken a note and circled it, and I want to come back to it.
Okay.
Going back to the VP of Facilities, Sustainability, and Risk, are they, I look at things through the Challenger framework. And if anybody hasn't read the Challenger sale, I don't recommend a whole lot of business books. I don't read a whole lot of business books. The Challenger sale is the only one that I kind of live by. And in the Challenger sale and in a lot of the organizations that I've seen have a really successful and effective sales team, they define the term champion as somebody who has the willingness and ability to affect change within their organization on your behalf, right? So if they have the ability but not the willingness, they're a blocker. If they have the willingness but not the ability, they're a cheerleader, but they can't make a decision. So I'll ask Jim and Rick, VP of Facilities, Sustainability, and Risk, champion or no? And I know it's going to depend on organization by organization. Just give me some general, paint with broad strokes here.
VP of Facilities can be a champion depending on the organization.
Okay. Is it sufficient to affect change across the organization and to adopt these kinds of metrics?
Generally, no. I think that Roger's piece is very key, that if you don't actually have somebody in the boiler room turning the levers, you can't really be successful either. In our business, we call it a high, wide, and deep sale. So we have to go high, wide, and deep into and actually, as the relationship lives on over 20 years with a customer, those pieces tend to change, and it's the job of the account manager to keep all those linkages together.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
can I weigh in quickly for a second?
Please.
A couple points. All right. So we've listed possible examples of what we mean by TXO, and in the Moneyball approach, the big advantage is the scoreboard was not invented by the Oakland Athletics, right? So the scoreboard was well known and well accepted across all of baseball, and as well as all of the specific statistics that make up the scoreboard. And all he did was choose those stats that were going to be applicable to achieving his win objectives, but the outside world already had established what the scoreboard is and was, right?
Yeah.
So we're in essence trying to create a new scoreboard. Within this list, are there certain things that are established, like cost of energy? Sure. Yeah, there's everybody can look at the utility bill, and now even knowing that, is that necessarily a metric that shows up on if I was talking to a CFO and I talk to them about their KPIs, is cost of energy on that list of KPIs that he's measuring the organization against? Perhaps in some cases, but I think in a lot of cases the answer would be no. So I'm not trying to pour water on our discussion here. I'm just trying to identify the reality of the situation, that it would be helpful if we first try to establish what are the known KPIs that the majority of CFOs or C-suite executives use to measure their success today, and to what degree can we align to those, so that we're speaking their language when we enter their world, as opposed to introducing to them brand new KPIs for which they probably don't even know what the hell we're talking about. And so I'll stop.
Well, sorry, don't want to cut you off, Steve. But so what's interesting about that prospect is that we're assuming that the organization we're talking to owns the building in a way. And in many commercial instances, like all the downtown office buildings typically are owned by investment funds, REITs, and the like. And the tenants lease out their office space.
Sure. Yep.
And in a situation like that, there's a fund manager who has, on paper, created a special purpose vehicle that's an LLC, that's a private entity that technically owns the building.
Mm-hmm.
And the tenants, there could be 100, there could be one. But the data, because all of the tenants pay all their own electricity bills and pay their fair share of the common area maintenance and charges, there's no one to make this case to.
Mm-hmm.
I challenge that though, and that's what we have to.
That's good.
And Steve, on your first point, and come back to how do you get to the right person? Yes, there are KPIs that are established in the world of real estate, and EUI, which is what you were touching on, actually needs to be informed by more than just the meter. You have to have or other details like square foot and all of that. And there's accepted ways to do that. There's also space utilization indexes, facility condition indexes, ways to track planned to unplanned maintenance, FTE per square foot. There's standard ways to quantify the different data into KPIs that are accepted. The problem has been that to do that so there's accepted terms and language around all that. For us to have any kind of effect on that has been the problem. So
But I just want to clarify, Rick, you're saying that these other methodologies, if I had a meeting with, putting the fund manager example aside, but I go into a corporate account that owns their own buildings, owns an owner operator, Okay. And I put some of these other terms that you just are referencing and present and spoke to the CFO or even the CEO for that matter, or the head of operations, whatever. They'll be familiar with these
Yep,
terms, or you think?
Yes, yes. My experience, yes.
Okay.
And and what's exciting is that we now have the ability to get data from those different systems, as we said at the top of the hour.
Sure.
To be able to show how our improved communications and improved technology approach can actually, bring data to the party, a party that already exists either on paper or in really expensive tools, and bring more data more easily, lower cost, and we can actually be a contributor to that party that's already going on that we may or may not know about. So that's why we're stepping in. We're stepping right into the middle of it.
So Steve, the point is well taken that the scoreboard for baseball has existed since the 1870s, and the stats are all there and they're publicly universally accepted. So I'll ask this question: with a lot of you guys, owning your own businesses and having operated at high levels for a long time, maybe take one of those longs away. It's less insulting there. But the opportunity to create a scoreboard in a fragmented ecosystem where you do have misaligned interests and offer that up to the market as a not a proprietary offering, but something that is new and valuable, especially in the world of ESG reporting. I don't know if that's an opportunity there, but where do you see that the opportunity to define a scoreboard and define metrics intersects with a fragmented industry where interests may not be aligned even within the same address? Is there a way that you've used that to your advantage in selling projects in the past? Was it did I ask a good question there? Let's start there. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Who was that to? Sorry.
I'm throwing things, I'm throwing things out generally. I'm saying that there are issues that you guys have called out, right? The tenant not being aligned with the owner. And there's a nebulous environment, right? There's an ambiguous environment where there's no scoreboard, where metrics are not generally well agreed on, with some exceptions, Rick, like you talked about the EUI. So is there an opportunity, or do you see ways of doing business in the future where you can create a scoreboard that brings some of these interests into alignment and starts to create, value because of it?
So Kyle, a lot of people have created building rating and metric systems. There are hundreds of them now. And one of the problems that I've struggled with over time is a lot of them revolve around the area that David Wiltz was talking about, which is commercial real estate, tenants, lease spaces. But what I find, and what is most challenging to me, is I operate primarily in institutional and industrial real estate, is people don't think of their business problem as real estate. They think about their business problem as what their business is in a particular vertical. If I'm in a hospital, I use hospital metrics. If I'm in automotive manufacturing, I use automotive manufacturing metrics. If I'm in petrochemicals, I use petrochemical metrics. So this is, where we get into a bind here in the baseball mentality. Baseball's very specific, right? We don't use the same metrics for football that we do for baseball. Metrics are heavily used in all of those categories now, maybe as a function of competitive professional sports being a quantitative game. But how do we play a game when we've got baseball hockey, basketball, and football, and the people are interested in their game.
So
Well,
the
It is consistent.
challenge,
FCI is consistent across every university, state, public, private that I've ever dealt with. It's just we don't know about that one. And then these other metrics actually go across all different kinds of facilities. That's where we're pulling all of them from. It's just our industry has not been part of this scorekeeping. But the scorekeeping is actually consistent across all types. And it's just we haven't played a role in it. And but give us a little bit of time here. We'll roll out more of the details and give visibility to what the scoreboard looks like.
Can
Well,
we
I think
find a
it's-
set of metrics that apply broadly? I'm sorry, David. Go ahead.
no. I
Yes.
agree with Jim, absolutely. And I know we can get there, Rick. What I think what we need to keep in mind is we have institutional owners like universities and hospitals and industrial, in many cases, manufacturing, but in a lot of commercial, like multifamily, with office and with retail, where it's not a single owner operator, there isn't this translation to the actual building owner benefiting from this data. And I'm not saying they can't benefit from the data. I do believe they can. However, when you have a triple net retail box somewhere, this data doesn't necessarily help them. And what I think should be the goal is that we do come up with the Moneyball data that's applicable across all asset types and with all asset owners. And I think it's possible. I know it's possible.
Yeah, so David, I would think in the commercial case, the asset value, we could call it the resale value, the asset value. What will the building sell for if I sold it tomorrow, right?
So, and you're spot on, Steve.
Right.
And the two things they care about is lowering their net operating, raising their net operating income
Yep.
from the property and raising asset value.
Right.
And if they can raise the net operating income and raise the asset value, it's fantastic. Now that can be done by lowering the cost of energy. That
Right.
can be done by lowering the property taxes somehow. So there are all these different levers to achieve that higher NOI and higher asset
Yeah.
value. It's
So
just a question
yes.
of return on investment to do
Right.
so.
And what I'm suggesting is, to Jim's point, is that when we come up with a list of these metrics that Rick was referring to, and asset value, I assume, would be one of them. Okay, by industry segment, we should consciously note the fact that certain segments are going to emphasize certain metrics over others. So as part of the, if you will, the marketing sales effort, just recognize the fact that in commercial, they are going to carry about asset and total cost of and the cost of operations. So just, I think that's fine. I think it's essentially the same scoreboard, but you're emphasizing certain parts of the scoreboard over others, which is not that different than the Moneyball example, right?
So I want to jump in. So
Finally.
David, you and Steve are going to where I believe we are slowly but surely getting there. We as an industry, in my opinion, have never talked this way, what I call towards the business side of this. So as I look at this and look at it like this, there's a economic business and an operational contribution to how buildings need to run today. So there are tangible results or tangible outcomes. There are intangible. So for example, economic business, and you guys started hitting that. lower real estate cost, reduce budgetary uncertainty in a portfolio. What is that value to an owner or an operator? Asset and property value, risk mitigation. David, you said this, NOI. How about the marketability? How about the CapEx, OpEx balance? Improve resiliency, extended equipment lifetime, help in capital planning, capital cost avoidance, meet compliance requirements. What do you think the cost is to a building owner if they're not meeting these new compliance type of requirements? The space optimization, all of this stuff is newer stuff that we haven't addressed that we should. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on this. Extending the lifetime value of a piece of equipment that I can go another 5 or 7 years before I have to put out a capital expense to replace my boiler or something. So we got to change our speak if this approach is going to work, that will resonate with those folks who are looking at these real estate properties as a business. So there you go.
Couldn't agree more, Mark. And then, so Jim, on the hospital side, if it's asset value on the commercial side, NOI and asset value, what is it for a hospital? What are those walks and home runs equivalents?
Well, I think that certainly energy is important, but hospitals worry about hospital regulation. There used to be something called the Joint Commission, which rates hospitals, and they're particularly interested in that. They should be more interested about pressurization of rooms, air filtration, ultraviolet lights, other things to worry about sanitation and preventing the spread of disease. Those are built into the metrics that they track. But I think that the regular metrics that apply to a traditional building in terms of cost per square foot, cost to run, will be viewed differently, as a hospital has a rather different maintenance and cleaning staff and cleaning schedules than a regular building.
Do HCAP scores factor into this at all, or that's
not that I've heard of?
Okay. So I know that we have a question here. Do we want to take that? It says, do you believe that scoring standardization?
I was writing an answer right now, actually. I'm happy to jump in and just say
go ahead. Go ahead.
So scoring, I think, is going to become less and less meaningful, because historically real estate has been an unregulated industry. As real estate becomes regulated through the carbon disclosure requirements from the EPA, from the SEC, from the state of California, and the city of New York, on and on and on, the disclosure for the embodied and operational carbon will become the metrics upon which the asset is judged. And, whatever LEED rating doesn't matter. What matters is your energy use per square foot, or energy intensity. And so any of these ratings for the building will, in my opinion, cease to matter compared to the performance of the building as shown in the disclosure requirements.
So can what we're doing with TXO help with that? It sounds
hell yeah. Yeah, because what we're doing is optimizing the performance of the asset and optimizing the cost performance of the asset over time. So by normalizing and being proactive about OpEx and normalizing and being proactive about CapEx, we can level those things out so they're not as peak and valley asks, which gives a much more consistent return on capital and a much better return on capital in the higher asset value and the higher net operating income. If it's an institutionally owned building like a hospital, This means they have a better performance and they can, you know, they don't have to spend as much money on their building, and they can maybe spend more on their staff and nurses that are overworked and stuff, and allocate the extra money where it can be more useful to the organization overall.
Great. So I think that we've got just a couple of minutes left. Something that occurs to me as we're kind of wrapping the conversation up today is there appear to be widgets, for lack of data-based widgets, that answer or inform all of the things that Mark was just talking about, right? Equipment lifecycle, insurance premiums, staff per building, all of these things that go into the overall operating budget and efficiency of the building. And it would seem that the equation, or the widget, for lack of a better word, for a commercial building in terms of the life cycle of an air handler would be applicable to an industrial or a healthcare setting, right? So there's probably some crossover here in things that this group could define that would feed into the TXOs for different sectors, different organizations, and could be customized based on a common vernacular for each organization. So maybe, I don't know, that's where we start next time. I'll take any final thoughts on the conversation today, and then we can get on with our afternoon.
Ken, do you want to chime in on your thoughts? You've been listening.
I'm hearing complexity, not clarity. Which is, I think, our problem, is that this is all.
But this is just in the sausage being made. What you're hearing is the complexity is the sausage being made right now.
It's probably just the moderator.
All that.
No, I mean, we all understand that it is complex, and the trouble is the rules change as we move from building to building, and that's part of the complexity. So trying to.
Well, that's the whole idea of creating something like a TXO, is to reduce it down to something that can be common. That's the search.
I think we need to test it with some examples, some real life examples would probably add clarity to it.
Yeah. Cool. Anybody who wants to say just some closing comments before we wrap? No. Okay. Well, this is a little bit different, as Mark and others have said, and I think this is the direction that we kind of need to go to. Now, we've been talking about the technology a lot, and we know that the barriers are not necessarily technology oriented. It's to do with the structure and how we do things and how we measure things. So that's kind of the intent of TXO in this conversation. And so I'm hoping we'll be able to continue this to some conclusion next week as we conclude this sort of next chapter month. And then we can think about what we're going to do in June. So with that, it's been really a good conversation. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kyle, again for moderating this, and thanks everybody for being here. And we'll get the video up soon tomorrow, and hope everybody has a great week.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye all.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.